We're all about answering subscriber questions, and a question came up recently when we were talking about Windows 11 and video editing and streaming and all the stuff that's going on. We have a user, a subscriber, that said, I need a laptop for video editing, and said, what do you recommend? Okay, because we know the specs, we come at it from that angle. We also can come at it from the angle of the software, or, as it always is about the project, what's your project. So our requirement is video editing. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you 7 laptops with the top 5 requirements. And remember, you change one thing, changes everything. So every one of these laptops are going to have some commonalities, but the formula that we're going to work with is the Adobe After Effects multi-frame rendering CPU optimization formula. Say that 3 times real fast. Okay, number 1, CPU cores times 4 equals RAM. Number 2, CPU core count equals video RAM. So what we're going to look at is how close we can get to that formula with some other things that we want to get this where we need it to be. Now, of this list of 7 laptops, for those that say this is too much money, we have 2 other laptops we found which was really interesting because, as I say, change one thing changes everything. But I want to walk you through these and show you what we're looking at. This is not an end-all list. This is a starting point to give you some idea of what you're looking for based on the formula I gave you. And as we look at those numbers and match those specs, I got to tell you, I was disappointed in some of the brands that we normally use that didn't make the list because of my first requirement. And let's go to the first computer, which is a Dell-Alienware. Now this can be purchased 2 ways. The Dell-Alienware can be purchased direct or it can be purchased on Amazon. My concern with the one from Amazon, and when I check the numbers, I'll have all this information up in the bibliography for the description of the video for you to check and verify for yourself. Okay, there's 2 ways to go when you're looking for memory for a laptop, other vendors. So I went to Kingston and I did a search 2 different ways for a particular laptop. One, an Alienware 17, and one, a different Alienware with some other numbers on it. One configuration could be upgraded. Another configuration could not be upgraded, implying that the memory was hardwired. So I have put in questions and asked on all these. So far, crickets. I haven't heard a thing. So my first question would be, can the memory be upgraded, or do you have to buy it that way when you buy it originally? In other words, is it field upgradable? It should be, but I don't know that for a fact with this. So I want to show you this from Dell because this is the best link we've got where you can look at 4 different configurations. Now this is just one computer. I got 6 more I want to show you. Now they say 5 options, but we're going to look at 4. And the primary concern is based on our formula, we need 8 cores. So the commonality with all these laptops is going to be 8 cores. Okay, a minimum configuration would be 16 gigs of RAM. If I went with 16 gigs of RAM, I have 2 choices here if I bought this direct. By default, I've got one with an RTX 3060 that has 6 gigs. Okay, if I've got 8 cores, I would like to have 8 gigs of RAM for the video. This happens to be an RTX 3060. The other one happens to be an RTX 3070. The preference would be the RTX 3070, but I could live with the RTX 3060. The memory, I'd like to be able to upgrade it. And the M.2 drive absolutely needs to be upgraded. Now, my first concern, I'm looking for a 17-inch display. And this one item on the display, if you go with a 15-inch, it's a whole nother world. And I've got one I can show you that's a pretty good deal. But I may say that for another video, because for video editing, you've got to be able to see what you're doing. And it used to annoy me with a smartphone when I first started working with that, how small the screen was. But then I realized when I'm editing, I need to be able to edit in that little screen to mimic what's on a smartphone. So when somebody else is looking at it, you have to consider what your audience is. Even though you want an external monitor with any of these, and we've got another video we're going to do, separate video about color grading and looking at a monitor that's of that caliber. But for a laptop, for the primary considerations, this is a pretty good deal. Let's look at the rest of it. And I can make a case for any one of these, and I can also make a case against them. Now these all have Windows 10 Home. I don't care for that. So number 1, I want a 17-inch display. Number 2, I want an RTX something. I don't want anything with a GTX anything. My minimum is an RTX 3060. That's 6 gigs. I would rather have 8 gigs based on the spec. So this has better bones because it has an RTX 3070. Number 1, the size of the display. Number 2, the graphics adapter. Number 3, both of these have an i7 11800H. I've already done the math. I've looked at these. I did a search, and I'll have the link up. These are 8-core processors. So on par, these have the same. Now, this one is 2100. This one's 2500. Yes, you're paying for that RTX 3070, but you also have a bigger M.2 drive. That M.2 drive, though, is still too small. For video editing, that needs to be 1 terabyte, even though everything you do will be done externally. And for external, that brings up another point. Some of these laptops, very few, but some of the laptops have Thunderbolt 3. We found one laptop. Actually, I take that back. I think we found 2 laptops that have Thunderbolt 4 in them. But again, as we go down this rabbit hole, it took some time to find this. But I like to think I know what I'm doing. I know hardware, but the vendors don't make this easy. They don't make this easy at all. Change one thing changes everything. But I want to take you through this in this configuration and show you what you can get, what you've got. Our suggestion is always get the bones. Get the processor, which is 8 cores. Get the video display adapter, because those things you cannot change out. The other stuff like RAM, if you can upgrade later. The M.2 drive, you can upgrade. If you get, say, like a 512 gig drive, 6 months down the road, you can upgrade that. But get the bones. Get that 17-inch display. Get that processor. So those are my top 3 things. The other 2 things, of course, is the M.2 drive. That's what everybody's got. And then the one thing we're not sure about, we don't know, which will require further investigation. These are laptops, so we don't know how many nits. What's the brightness on the display? That's something you'll want to know, that you need to get into, and you need to check. And if the vendor doesn't have it up there, we need to ask. And what I'll tell you, if the vendor's not proud enough to advertise it, that's a big red flag. They don't want you to know. But it's easy enough to test for. But that's after you get it. So, and that brings up another point, where you buy it from. You need to buy it from some place that you have some kind of return policy that says, you know, this doesn't meet my needs. I want to be able to get rid of it. But every one of these, I think, are pretty solid machines. But this is the first one on my list. And there's nothing here about Thunderbolt. Now, if we change this one configuration from 16 gigs to 32 gigs, it's interesting. The 2 that pop up, we still have an 8-core processor. One's an i7, one's an i9. These both have 16 gigs of video. So if you're really heavy into animation, you need a 3080 that's 16 gigs. And what's curious, because these are NVIDIA GeForce, they also have CUDA cores. And you get the CUDA cores, hopefully, that go with it, unless Dell is still neutering those CUDA cores. There's been a real big stink about that. But you get the key advantage of still 512 gig M.2 drives as a default. Those still have to be upgraded. Who wants to spend $3,300 for a laptop that you've still got to upgrade? Okay. Number 1, you got a 17-inch display. Number 2, you got video there that's better than most video cards that people have in their desktop computers. That's 16 gigs of video, which is overkill based on that formula, which is a starting point of 8 cores. So the ideal machine, based on the formula, would probably be this machine with 16 gigs of RAM that's got an RTX 3070 with 8 gigs. 8 gigs, 8 cores, upgrade the RAM, if it can be, and upgrade the M.2 drive, which can be. Question is, how difficult will it be? But they don't mention Thunderbolt, and yes, they do. These laptops both have Thunderbolt 4. Sometimes it's info, you just got to dig for it. So on my list of laptops, that's a laptop that is probably going to be good for, I'd say, 7 to 10 years with those kind of specs in it. But if you can do a desktop, you'll get a whole lot more in a desktop. Instead of 8 cores, you'll be looking at something with 16 cores. But for a laptop, and you remember Thunderbolt 4 is also going to be USB 4 compliant. So the 3 things that Thunderbolt can do, Thunderbolt period, which would be power delivery as said here, but you've also got data, and then you've got video. So of the 3 things that Thunderbolt can do, it's there. That's a nice laptop. So based on one item, which is the display adapter, this Alienware X17 laptop for $2,500, that's the one to be looking at. Now, every one of these laptops I'm going to show you are in that price range of $2,500. I'll tell you that right off the bat. Now, the next one, this is on Amazon. Now, this was available. It says right now it's not available. This is an Asus Republic of Gamers 2021 Strix Scar, 17-inch. It's got a Ryzen 9, which happens to be 8 cores, 32 gigs of RAM, a 1 terabyte drive, and it has an RTX 3070 8 gig. That was $2,500. It's from Excalibur PC. They've customized it. And that alone is the reason for having multiple laptops to look at, because unless you know what you're looking for, plugging in the specs, you'll never find it. Some of these I had to go specifically looking for specific computers to pull this list, to bring this together. And this was available. Now it's not. It may come back into availability. For this, we'd have to check with the vendor and say, hey, are you going to get some more of those? But in terms of when someone says, what brand do you prefer? For me, Asus #1, top of the list. I like Asus, I like HP, and I thought HP Omen would have something, but not with a 17-inch display. If I went to a 15, a lot of stuff pops up. But that's laptop number 2. Now, there are only 2 PCs in this list, if I remember correctly, that have a Ryzen. That's the first one. Now I'll take you and show you one that is a Dell business laptop, a little bit less expensive. So we've got a 17-inch display. It's a 2-in-1 laptop, so it's convertible. It's an 11th generation i7. It has 64 gigs of RAM and a 1 terabyte drive. And it has Thunderbolt 4. But what I don't like is the video that's in here. And that's an example. Intel Iris Xe graphics. Okay, the question comes up and says, why is that important? That's important because that's shared memory. That video display adapter is sharing with your system memory. You don't want that. You want a display adapter that's dedicated with dedicated memory. So this is a pretty good laptop, but the display is terrible. So I just want to warn you on that. I want to show this because it's got a lot of things that can wow somebody, but it doesn't have everything to keep you on track. What we found with the last test we did, which were very informal, we did a lot of testing with display adapters and video rendering, because if you're video editing, you're doing 3 things possibly. You're going to edit. That's easy. You can do that anything. But the most important thing is rendering, and you may want to be able to do streaming. Those are the 3 main things you're going to do. Okay, for the rendering, that's the reason for that formula. To render on something like this, to get back to the formula and what we found, informally, we did a last test with Vegas Pro, which is now owned by Magix. And about 2 or 3 years ago, it was 10% on the GPU. With the latest test, we found that rendering is 80% on the GPU. So that GPU is extremely important. It needs to match what the processor is. So let's move on to the next one. Now this is a customized laptop, and this happens to be MSI. The CUK is for the vendor, which is Computer Upgrade King. Okay, we're looking at an MSI. This is a GP76 Leopard. #1, 17-inch. #2, we have 32 gigs of RAM. Perfect. #3, we have a 1 terabyte hard drive. Perfect. And #4, we have an NVIDIA RTX 3070, which means it has 8 gigs. Perfect. Now, what else do we have? Because this is of the caliber and class it is, and it's in the price range, does this have Thunderbolt on it? Because it's MSI, it should, but I cannot find it in the specs. I have put in a question about it, and so far crickets. So that would be the one thing I would check on. I don't know if it has Thunderbolt, and Thunderbolt would be something that would be nice, Thunderbolt 3 or Thunderbolt 4. So you got that high-speed data interconnect. That's the real reason for that, because you need to be able to do your work. But everything else in there other than Thunderbolt, that's a good laptop for the money, $25.50. It's MSI. MSI would not be my first choice, but it would be one of my choices. Next laptop. Now this is one that's we've been watching for a long time. We've never recommended, but based on the specs and what's in here, this is a Razer Blade Pro 17 gaming laptop. Now this has an i7. So #1, we have a 17-inch display. #2, we've got 8 cores. #3, we've got a GeForce RTX 3070, which means it's 8 gigs. The one thing, #4 and #5, 16 gigs of RAM, that needs to be upgraded. The 512 M.2 NVMe, that needs to be upgraded. This has Thunderbolt 3, which is pretty cool, but for the money, that really ought to be Thunderbolt 4. Nice laptop, buying it direct or buying it on Amazon. And this is from the Razer store, and it's shipped and sold from Amazon, by Amazon, which is a good thing. So you have to decide, do you want Thunderbolt 3 or do you want Thunderbolt 4? Let's move to the next one. And I've got a link up into Razer that'll show you some of their examples. And all of these are out of stock. Some of them may come back into stock. And I believe the ones that show up on their website show that they have Thunderbolt. Now this particular one, the problem is it's got the integrated graphics, but you've got the discrete graphics, which is the GeForce RTX 3080. And that's something else you need to check and verify. What we found using with the Asus Republic of Gamers laptop that we use to do the graphics overlay when we do live video, so we can get credits up while we're talking. On that laptop, it has a discrete graphics, but the problem is there's no way in the BIOS to switch to the discrete graphics. In other words, you're using the built-in graphics, and you have to switch according to application within the software control panel to do that. That's a real hassle, real annoying. So that is one thing that I would want to verify. Is there some way through hardware that I can default? And the reason they do that is to save power. But that's one of those dirty little secrets they don't tell most people. So I would want to verify every one of these laptops, can that be done? And the other things that I'm not even getting into, like quality of the display on your higher end laptops, how many nits, what's the brightness, you'll have that information. But these are things I want to point out. But otherwise, this is a nice laptop. We have never used that brand, but I'm not against it. Now, we did a search through NVIDIA for a studio laptop, and based on our specs and what we were looking for, only one laptop popped up that met our requirements, which would be a 17-inch display, an RTX something, and it happened to be a Razer Blade Pro 17 with an RTX 3070, which means it's got 8 gigs. So number one is 17-inch display. Number two, we've got an RTX 3070. Number three, there's 16 gigs of RAM. That needs to be upgraded. Number four, it's a 512 gig SSD. That needs to be upgraded. And then number five, do we have Thunderbolt? And based on the information direct with Razer, we do. Based on the information for this laptop at Amazon, we don't know. But according to what Razer says we do, I would verify. Now this says Thunderbolt 3 here on Amazon. Yeah, and verifying the information on the Razer site, right there it is, a Thunderbolt 3 port. So that verifies that, not Thunderbolt 4. If I'm buying a new laptop and I'm spending that kind of money, I think it'd be kind of nice to have Thunderbolt 4. That's just me. It's not a deal breaker, but, you know, we have to look at our options. Consider all options. Again, this is just a starting point. Now, another laptop that popped up on our radar, and this is a Gigabyte Aero 17. Now, we're real gung-ho about Gigabyte motherboards. Love their motherboards. I'd like to try some of their monitors. Haven't gotten that far yet. We have never tried, although we have seriously considered a Gigabyte laptop. But I would like to look at one. The price looks pretty good. Let's look at the specs. Number one, we have a 17-inch display. Number two, it's an i7. Number three, we have an RTX 3070, which means we have 8 gigs. Number four, we have 16 gigs of RAM. And then number five, we have a 1 terabyte M.2 NVMe drive. And the one thing we're not sure about, let's see, 8 cores on the CPU. We're not sure about Thunderbolt. Yep, it has Thunderbolt, but it doesn't say what version. So we'll do a quick search. We don't know. So what we'll do, we'll go into Newegg, find that same laptop. Actually, we'll find another Gigabyte. And this happens to be, okay, we've gone from a Gigabyte Aero 17, which has a Intel i7, 8 cores. Now we're looking at a Gigabyte A7X1, which has an AMD Ryzen 9 5900, which is also 8 cores. So number one, we have a 17-inch display. Number two, we have 8 cores. This happens to be an AMD Ryzen. This is the second Ryzen. Number three, we have an RTX 3070 with 8 gigs. So those two are well matched. But number four and five, 16 gigs of RAM. Can it be upgraded? It should be. The 512 gig M.2 NVMe drive, when they say 512 gig PCIe, same thing. That's an M.2 NVMe. I like the price on this. Looks pretty good. $1,900. At $1,900, you can upgrade the memory, I'd say, in maybe 6 months. And the 512 gig M.2 drive, probably about the same time. I would do both while you've got it open. And I haven't looked at the manual to see where it's located. What I don't know is if we have Thunderbolt. Probably not. And I don't see it, and probably not according to the specificity with Intel and the problems with getting that certified. But it's worth looking at for the price, if you don't mind. Now, this will have USB-C. USB-C gives you 3 things. And what are those 3 things? USB-C can give you power. USB-C can give you data connectivity. And by the way, USB-C can give you, if they have it in the spec, video, which usually will say something like DisplayPort connectivity. I'm just saying. It's a difference in bandwidth. Not only bandwidth, but throughput both ways. But all of these things are something to consider. So let's move on to the next one. Now this all started because we had a question on our video, The Beginner's Guide to Capturing and Streaming Video, about laptops. And PC Mag also has an article, we'll have a link up, for the best 17-inch laptops for 2021. And number one on their list is the Alienware M17R4. And that model, M17R4, if you go to Kingston, which we'll have a link into, and do a search for an Alienware M17, you'll get one set of specs. But if you go into Kingston, and this is for looking for memory, and look for an Alienware M17R4, they claim that's not upgradable. So that would be a sticking point for me that I would want to look into. The other three machines, based on the information we've talked about, not on my radar. But you can take a look at those. Next one on the list. Now we're going to take a little twist. This is where it gets interesting, because remember, changing one thing can change everything. Okay, the first place I recommend to look for a laptop would be at Costco. Why is that? Okay, at Costco they have the best return policy, 90 days. If you change your mind, for any reason you don't like it, you got 90 days. So if you're fickle, no big deal. Take it back. That's what I like about Costco. Now, Costco has two laptops. I've got a link in that's going to work for now. It will not work later, but it works for now. And I'm going to show you two laptops. And I only did a search for one item. And these two popped up. An NVIDIA GeForce. I went into Costco. I did a search on laptops and notebooks. And I did a specific search for a GeForce RTX 3060. That's as high as they go. Oh, this is interesting. This link had two laptops when I put this together. Now there's only one. Wow. One was MSI, and I think the other was ASUS, and it's out of the list. Anyway, $1,500. So we look at the requirements. Number one, we've got a 17-inch display. Number two, we've got an RTX 3060, which means it's 6 gigs. It needs to be 8. We'll go back and do the search again and see what we come up with. Number three, we have, as we go down here to the specs, number three, we got 16 gigs of RAM. That needs to be upgraded. Number four, we've got a 1 terabyte M.2 NVMe PCI Express drive. Perfect. Now, typically with Costco, they will have done something or neutered something to get the price at the point they have. Folks, at that price point for $1,500, that ain't bad. It's an MSI, which is not at the top of my list, but for $1,500, that's not bad. You got 90 days to try it, and if you don't like it, send it back. Now, one thing we want to find, and the one thing we don't seem to find, it doesn't look like this has Thunderbolt on it, but it will have USB-C, although it does not have it listed. So that would be the one thing I would want to check and verify. But based on the price, not bad. Now, I didn't mention anything about the displays with all these. I didn't mention anything about resolution. I will say now that we're kind of at this point, for those that want 4K or want to stream 4K, you have to ask yourself, 4K, is it a feature or is it a benefit? If it's a feature, is that something you're going to use? If it's a benefit, then okay. If you've ever tried to clone a laptop with a 4K display, when you use something like CloneZilla, that print is so tiny you need a microscope to look at it. So keep that in mind. On a laptop, 4K doesn't make sense until you get to a big display like 65 inches. So putting 4K on a laptop, just a 4K virtual screen maybe, but a 4K actual physical screen that's 17 inches, absolutely not. I would keep that at a 1080 resolution. So I'm just saying that and putting that out there. That's my opinion. Your results may vary. Okay, of the two laptops we looked at, I got one more here I want to show you right quick. And this is CUK. This is the Computer Upgrade King. Okay, this is an MSI. So number one, it's a 17-inch. Number two, it's an i7. So this is 8 cores, 32 gigs of RAM, 512 gig M.2 NVMe drive, which needs to be upgraded. We have an RTX 3060, which is 6 gigs. So, I can live with it for $2,000. Now, my next question is number 5, do we have Thunderbolt? It's not listed, but because it's an MSI, it should be Thunderbolt 4. But I don't know that for a fact. I'd want to check into it. And this configuration is 32 gigs with a 512 gig SSD. Even if you upgrade it, they go to 64 gigs with a 1 terabyte. 32 gigs is fine on a laptop, but you need a 1 terabyte M.2 drive. $2,000. So let's swing back around to Costco, and let's do this one more time. Shop all departments, computers, laptops, PC laptops, and no, folks, PC laptops are all we know. That's all we do, because that's what we build. Build or buy. Do we build it or do we buy it? And of all these laptops they've got, the one thing we're going to look at is the display adapter. And we want to see, we want an RTX, but we want to keep, oh wow, there's an RTX 3070. So the one we looked at was an RTX 3060. This RTX 3070 is new. Let's see what they've got. We'll have that link up, but you know how to get to it. Bummer. That's an Asus, but it's a 15-inch screen and it's $2,700. And it's a 4K. That's a possibility, but we want a 17-inch. So I'd nix that. So as the question was asked in this video, Beginner's Guide to Capturing and Streaming, the question was asked by the intelligent CPA. I don't think I can run 4K with my current laptop, so I'll be waiting for a future video. Is there a computer you recommend for video editing? So I said, yes. Laptop, I'd be honored. Do you have a brand preference? Dell? A lot of people love Dell. I said, do you want specs in general or a specific model? I gave her a specific model as an example. Then after I got to thinking about it, I said, we need to make a video on that and give some examples of laptops. So we've done that. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, we want to thank you guys for watching. My name is Gil Boyd. This is Builder Buy. We're on to the next video. We're out.